Hi, I'm John,
And I'm Meredith.
and this is No Talking in the Library, social distancing edition. Meredith and I thought that we would get on and take the opportunity to tell you guys about some of the stuff that we've been doing since we haven't been in the library and have had, some time on our hands.
And hopefully suggest a few things for you guys to watch or listen to or read while you're at home.
Yeah, much as this is, obviously not a very good situation generally, it is a time, we are kind of fortunate in the respect that we have access to a lot of stuff that gets streamed directly to our houses. I mean, think about, or houses and apartments or whatever, but think about how it would have been if you had to go to the video store every day and like pick up your videos, socially distanced or whatever.
Right, or just read the books you have in your home
Right.
rather
Well,
than have access to, Overdrive and Hoopla and the vast collection of digital media.
right, right.
So, John, what have you been reading since I have seen you last?
Well, oddly enough, I've been reading The Walking Dead, at least the first few issues. This is the original graphic novel that was done by Robert Kirkman and Tony Moore, put out by Image Comics. It's the basis for the show. Okay, maybe in the current moment, the zombie apocalypse is not necessarily what you want to read about, but it's really, really, it's really well done. It's a really compelling story. The show, I think, to a great extent, does it justice, but I'll sort of like put this up here. And the reason I want to show people this is because it's in black and white. It's all ink. It's all black and white ink, and so it's not. There's some grim things in it, as you might expect, but uh, but it doesn't have that kind of graphic quality that the television show has. It's just really good sort of graphic novel type storytelling, and a really great story about it tells a sort of early story of the sheriff trying to get back to his family and find out what's going on and cope with kind of situation, which obviously, once again, this is not the zombie apocalypse so far as we know, but there's certain ways in which it's comparable too, that people feel really isolated. I think that's a thing that's happening right now. People are sort of like looking inward, trying to sort of get with their families, etc. And I just think as far as graphic novels goes, really one of the best things around, and available on Hoopla, if
Hoopla,
I'm
yes, that is
not
correct.
mistaken. That's our one of the free media platforms that we have available at the library. You can access it via our website. It's completely free. They have books, they have audiobooks, they have some movie type stuff. They have graphic
They
novels.
have a lot of comic books, so if you're
Yeah,
interested in getting into reading that, I think they have a vast collection of DC superhero comics, as well as I think all of The Walking Dead.
yeah. It's just I've yet to go into Hoopla and not find something that I was interested in checking out. So
Yeah, I haven't been doing that much reading. Just kind of hard with everything that's going on to focus long enough to sit down and read. But I did start A Confederacy of Dunces. I don't know if you read that.
an absolute classic, an absolute classic.
Yeah, it's something that my dad has been like harassing me to read forever. And the quarantine seems to be the moment to do it.
Right. Do you not to get all, historical on you and all, but do you know the story, any of the backstory of Confederacy of Dunces?
I read a little bit about oh my God, you'd think I would even know who
John
um
Kennedy Toole.
yes, thank you, John Kennedy Toole. I read a little bit about his life just to get an idea of, because I think it was published like way after he died, right?
Yeah, he tried to get it published, as I recall the story. He tried to get it published, quite extensively and just completely failed. And then
I think
after
someone told him that it was well written but like had no point. which is like hilarious because I think like the current state of media in like our time is like irreverent and having no point.
Right. That's exactly. I mean, it's a way ahead of its time, I think, in a lot of respects.
Yeah.
And then Walker Percy, the famous Southern novelist, I think his mother contacted Walker Percy or something like that. And Walker Percy, I think, as the story goes, submitted under his own name. And the publisher was like, "Wow, this is great." And then he was like, "Yeah, by the way, I didn't write it." So that was how it ended up getting published. But I'm really, once you finish it, you'll have to tell me what you think. I think that's one of the absolutely funniest books ever written.
Yeah, it's definitely not something, not my typical read, I think.
You're right.
But
Yeah, it
I
doesn't
have
take
to say,
place on the prairie.
yeah, or it doesn't have like, a strong female character, or it's not written by
Right.
Sylvia Plath. But
Right. Right.
but it's the part of it that I had read so far is surprisingly funny. I think it's set in New Orleans, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it's so far I've really enjoyed. He's the main character, Ignatius J. Riley is needs to find employment, and I just got to his first job at, I think, a pants store or
Right.
something, or a manufacturer.
Right. Oh my
And
gosh.
he is upset about a letter that his boss got, and he's like, oh, let me just rewrite that, that
Right.
letter, describe, like, telling the person writing the letter that they're ridiculous and not worth his time. And he's a very funny character, and I am looking forward to finish
Right.
reading it.
I remember just like he's constantly like, my pyloric valve has absolutely slammed shut.
Yeah.
I have no idea what his pyloric valve is, and I absolutely do not want to know. But there you go.
Right, but his valve is always causing him distress.
Right. Right.
Yeah, all right. What have you been listening to?
Well, Lord Huron a lot. Lord Huron, for some reason, the name of the album that made them famous is escaping me now.
Strange Trails is the
Strange
one,
Trails.
yeah,
Yeah.
that has The Night We Met on it.
Right. And that song is just it featured in 13 Reasons Why, if I'm
Yes.
not
Yes, on
mistaken.
Netflix,
Yeah.
13 Reasons Why, that's correct.
And it's just an absolutely beautiful kind of folk rock. It's almost sort of like, in a weird way, it's kind of like halfway between Nickel Creek and like the Gaslight Anthem.
With a little Hozier thrown in.
Right. Yeah. It's got a very sort of subtle vibe to it, even when it's kind of doing slightly faster songs. The funny story about this, which we talked about earlier, but which maybe people watching this will find funny, is that we were sort of listening to it sitting on desk one day, and I was like, "Oh, I've heard this. What is it?" And you said, "Oh, Lord Huron." And then, like, the sort of slow way my brain works, we're sort of like a couple of weeks into social distancing, and I'm like, God, the Night We Met has been kind of banging around in my head. Maybe I'll like download the record, a little later. And I'm like looking around and cleaning up something in my office, and I move a stack of stuff, and I find the CD that you made for me of that record, like when you first heard it. And but yeah, I recommend, you can get that from Google Play. You can get it from
You can get it from Freegal, actually,
get it from
if you're
Freegal.
with
Yes,
your
if you
library card.
absolutely right. And it's an absolutely beautiful atmospheric
Yeah,
record.
The Night We Met is really one of the greatest songs I've ever heard. I think one of our coworkers was listening to it in the AV room one day, and it stopped me in my tracks, and I was like, what is this CD? Like, what is this song?
Right.
And it's so good. It's one of the whole CD is good. It's
Right.
not just that one song. It's one of those great CDs that I know it sounds like an insult, but I like to describe them as CDs you can ignore. But I
Right.
only mean that in, like, it's an amazing CD to just put on and have in the background, while you're cooking or doing something else. And it's so nice.
Yeah, I was listening to this. I my wife and I were listening to it in the car, and uh, it
Driving, that's another. Yeah.
right, yeah, it struck me that in a way it kind of sounds like a slightly laid back version of like Bruce Springsteen in a weird way. Like the singer doesn't sound like Bruce Springsteen at all, but the the like chord progressions that they use have a very like. So if you like that kind of music, I mean, I recommend it to anyone. I think you're right. The Night We Met is one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard. So yeah, for sure. What have you been listening to these days?
Well, a couple of my favorite musicians have released new albums. Sierra Hull has 25 Trips, has come out. Aoife O'Donovan released an EP of songs that she wrote the music to, and the lyrics were poems. I think it's called Bullfrogs Croon and Other Tales or Songs or something like that. And Sarah and Sean Watkins, the brother sister from Nickel Creek,
Right,
released a sibling album, I think under their Watkins Family Hour sort of banner.
right,
It's called Brother Sister. And I know I said to you earlier that unfortunately none of them are very good, but I think that I was a little overly harsh.
right,
Because I have been listening to a lot of music actually right now. Going for walks is one of the few sort of activities that I've been able to do. So I've been listening to CDs, and I'm cooking a lot, so I like to play music. Um, 25 Trips is definitely not as good as Weighted Mind, which is her actually not second album. I think it's actually her fourth or something like that.
right,
But her most recent up to this new one. But I did give Brother Sister another listen after that conversation you and I had, and it's not bad. It's got a couple of catchy songs, and there's just, especially in this sort of like crazy unpredictable time, I'm finding a lot of comfort in sort of listening to old favorite records and watching movies that rewatching TV shows that I've enjoyed in the past. So it's been really nice to like listen. I've been listening to Nickel Creek. I've been listening to Sarah Watkins for a decade or more.
right.
Been really, I've gone back and listened to their very first album, and it's been nice to have sort of that comfort and that familiarity
Right.
at this time. Nickel Creek is a great folk band if that's something that you like. All of their albums are on Hoopla. If you're not sure if you like it, I highly recommend checking out This Side. That's their second album. I think it's their most accessible album. If it's something
Right.
that you're not sure but just want to check out, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, if you look on YouTube too, I know that I will just as a caveat say I know that you don't like the Decemberists very much, but um, Sarah Watkins did do an extensive turn with the Decemberists back about almost 10 years ago now, and I happened to be flipping around on YouTube and found a live version of Colin Malloy from the Decemberists and Sarah Watkins doing "Why We Fight." I think on KEXP. I'm not sure, or maybe on Sirius. But anyway, uh, Sarah Watkins is so talented and just can do like anything she turns her hand to. She just ends up doing incredibly well. So yeah, I definitely second. If you have the opportunity, check out Nickel Creek because they're really very good.
All right, what have you been watching?
Well, okay, so uh, the big thing sort of coming into as the whole sort of COVID-19 thing was getting going was this documentary Tiger King, and Tiger King is kind of emblematic of sort of two kinds of documentaries that go on these days. One is the sort of like true crime, like Making of a Murderer or the Amanda Knox documentary, which I think is just called Amanda Knox. Um, and the other is the sort of slice of weird Americana ones. This particular documentary is about a guy who owned a large animal park, a large like wild cat park
Hmm.
in the South, in uh,
Oklahoma, I think.
Oklahoma. Yeah, and the sort of incredible shenanigans that he got up to, and now he's doing some serious time. Uh, but it's just, you know, spoiler alert, but you know, like that's, it would be hard to miss, and doesn't really, I think, like uh doesn't really wouldn't really ruin for anybody the unbelievable craziness of what the whole thing is about. I mean, it's just really now, as a caveat for our viewers, I will say this gets into some really crazy stuff. It's not the kind of thing that you probably want to watch with your young children around. There's a lot of F-bombs. There's a lot of crazy lifestyles. But it's just a really sort of interesting look at a whole. I had just absolutely no idea that this was a thing, and you know, and it
And
just
it's a huge thing. Like suddenly my eyes have been open to like the whole world of selling and breeding like large animals. And I mean there's uh Joe Exotic, the Tiger King, but there's also Doc Antle and his whole crazy um
right,
setup.
right.
And
And then there's the conservationist woman who, I in a weird way comes up. I mean, it's funny. It's not. She isn't weird. She comes off, I think, as one of the most sensible people of any of the people touched on by this thing. But she then, and this is not spoiler for like the thing, but just sort of, you would find this out on the internet by, you know, in about 10 seconds, has become the subject of all these weird conspiracy theories. Her husband died or was killed in Florida or something
or
like that.
possibly disappeared, who
Right,
knows.
yeah, who knows? And you know, like all kinds of, I think Gwyneth Paltrow weighed in on the whole thing. Like, I mean, what she has to offer the whole thing is a little hard to know, um but it's definitely, it's really interesting television. It's available on
Netflix.
Netflix.
Yep.
Yeah, Netflix has just, you know, puts out tons and tons of really interesting content, and the a Netflix subscription is really, you know, pretty cheap and very worthwhile if you have,
A true
interest.
investment. If at any moment to get it, it would be now.
Right, absolutely. You know, it's one of those things. I know I said this about Hoopla earlier, but it's true about Netflix. I've yet to go onto Netflix in the long time that I've had it and not find something that I was, you know, something that I was interested in watching.
Mhm.
So what have you been watching?
I have been rewatching The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel,
Oh, that is a great show.
actually
Yeah.
on Amazon Prime. It's by creator Amy Sherman Palladino. If you've watched Gilmore Girls or Bunheads, you will immediately know what you're about to get into. I know there is a lot of criticism about Amy Sherman Palladino, but and how the worlds that she creates are so hyperbolic. They're not like there's been a lot of criticism about Marvelous Mrs. Maisel being set in New York City in the late 50s, and it's not really what the city was like, but that's sort of her that's her thing. You know,
Right.
she creates a a I don't know what you just how to describe it.
She just creates a sort of like scene or an atmosphere that's
Yeah,
very
thank you. The
her.
atmosphere, yes,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
of what it might be like. And it's about a woman who becomes a stand-up comic, starring Rachel Brosnahan. And it's just I really like that fast-paced, back and forth style of Amy Sherman Palladino dialogue. I know it can be irritating for some people to listen to, but I've always just it's
Right.
just hit on some part of my mind that's
Right.
really enjoyable.
There's some people like Amy Sherman Palladino is very polarizing in a way, because like I've yet to like find someone who watched Gilmore Girls and was just meh. like people tend to either really love Gilmore Girls or really hate it. And it took me, like, the first time, like, my wife watched it, and I was just, she put it on while I was like grading, and I wasn't really paying attention. But then I got interested in it because the characters are really fascinating, and the way she does dialogue is absolutely, it just, once again, and this is something that I think we both experienced with her work. Like, it's just like, it's very gripping. And if you'd watched Gilmore Girls and then watched like the first 10 minutes of Marvelous Mrs. Maisel without knowing who was involved, you would know that it was Amy
Yeah.
Sherman
And
Palladino.
it's not mimicking human speech. Let's be very
Right.
clear. It's definitely stylized. But I love that series because it almost seems like what Amy Sherman Palladino would have wanted to do maybe with Gilmore Girls, but without sort of the restrictions of the network. She's got a lot of freedom with being on Amazon Prime to tackle subjects, and using the language that she's wants to use without being hamstrung by the
Right.
WB or anything. And best character, Alex Borstein as Midge Maisel's manager, Susie.
Right.
It's literally one of those roles that she was born to play.
Sure. Yeah, that's absolutely
If
true.
anybody's out there to watch Gilmore Girls, Alex Borstein was originally cast as Suki.
Right.
But that role is, I think, supposed to have a little, sort of warmth to it, and she fits so much better as like the caustic,
Right.
um, the one who's gonna call Midge out when she's being ridiculous.
Right. She kind of
Such a
wouldn't
great
have.
dynamic.
Right. She kind of wouldn't have fit in Stars Hollow very well, but she fits in this absolutely perfectly.
Yeah. So it's a funny show. Again, it's a fast-paced show. It's, for me, it's the kind that I want to click to the next one. It's escapist because it's like it's a fictionalized version. The costumes are wonderful. She's always wearing these incredible dresses. It's almost like you think the characters are going to break out in song at any minute.
Right. Right.
But I think it's a great show for the kind of time we're in right now.
Right. And that,
So,
is that Netflix again, or
this one's Amazon Prime.
that's Amazon Prime?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Gilmore
absolutely.
Girls is on Netflix.
That's true. Yeah, and
So,
also well worth. I mean, Gilmore Girls is a long series. There's what,
seven seasons. Last two are
plus.
terrible, but
Yeah, less the quality dropped off. But Amy Sherman Palladino wasn't involved after a
in
certain point.
yeah, she was definitely not involved in the last season. I think she might have been for the second to last, but I think at that point she was in like self-destruct, like light the building on fire on my way out kind of way.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
I
That
kind
could
of.
be hearsay. I don't know. I may have just made that up, but
Right. No, I kind of think of that moment in the show that Kristen Bell is in with Don Cheadle, where she's quitting her job and she walks into the elevator after just lighting the office on fire and pretends to throw a hand grenade like back through the door as the doors close. It's sort of, that
yeah.
strikes me as what it must have been like. But yeah, just an absolutely fabulous show, and definitely something, a good sort of binge watching opportunity for times like these. Well, I think that's all we've got for episode 1.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be back here soon.
Right, we've got a bunch of other stuff we want to talk about, but take the opportunity to look into some of this stuff, and hopefully soon we'll have some more stuff for you. Okay.